Great. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you here. Thank you for coming in. So very quickly, the topic today is about how do you create deep connections in a virtual environment. So I'm going to get you to think about an answer to two questions. And I'd like you to write it down. And if you're coming to my workshop later, we will deal with both questions. Otherwise, leave these things for me in mural, and I'll make sure I get back to you. So the first is, if you had to introduce yourself in a metaphor of a transportation vehicle, what would it be? And the second is your top challenge in creating connections when facilitating virtual events. So let me introduce myself with the metaphor. If I had to think of myself as a transportation vehicle, I would say I'm like a Hummer for a couple of reasons, and you can't see all of me here. I am 6'3", I'm about 250 pounds, and I'm a pretty big guy, so just like a Hummer. And as Douglas just said, I travel way too much, or at least used to before the pandemic. So that means my carbon footprint, unfortunately, used to be terrible. I'm probably going to downsize because of the pandemic to a small scooter or something, because my carbon footprint's a lot better now. So just something for you to just make a note of someplace, and feel free to put that in mural or show up in my workshop. So a couple of quick things. We talk about engagement, and I'm going to give you a minute to look at these 4 quotes. I mean, this entire summit has a wonderful quote on its homepage, but I'll let you see this. And in chat, if you could just put in which quote resonates the most for you, right? Which author, maybe anonymous, might show up over there. I'll give you about 15 seconds to read it. Okay, great. So we talk about engagement, we're talking about virtual connections. And one of the things that I have discovered is that a lot of us, I mean, I lead teams, I manage people, I'm part of some teams. So we have our weekly connects. Well, I get into calls with a lot of people. And there's 2 types of connections I've seen evolve over the last few years. There's what we call transactional connections. And on the other side, there's also meaningful connections. Both have significant value when we are getting groups together in the virtual environment. Now, the interesting thing is about thinking about what has value when. Now, I would say, from my experience, and I'd love to hear from all of you in chat, what are some of the most common connection mechanisms used to get people together when we get them online? So let me just share with you a couple of the most common ones I've seen. Some of them are very creative starts. There are people who use props, find something. I was part of a funny hat party recently at work. Clothing, virtual backgrounds, keeps changing during sessions. Lots of other ones are word cues, either in chat or rename, feeling or something you did to check in, something no one knows about you, the 3 questions that's often done. The most common is 2 truths and a lie, 1 new skill or hobby you've learned in the last 1 year, multi-renaming chances. All of these are awesome to get it started, get groups together. They are really useful. Icebreakers, we call them energizers. There's so many other things that are used when we talk about it. Now, these are all great. They serve the purpose of starting to create a safe space. Now, the interesting perspective that we talk about is when do we need to move to more meaningful connections? Now, the reality is, all of us, when we did most of our work in a face-to-face environment, those meaningful connections happen when? It's before we start. It's during the coffee breaks. It's when we go have lunch together. It's at the evening connections, the networking piece. Now, these spaces, that we just talked about, or these mechanisms that you see on this slide, are useful to get us going. They're good to create a safe space. The interesting aspect is at times we need to move from safe space to a brave space. When we're having conversations that go deep, that are significantly meaningful, how do you move people from a safe space to a brave space? Now, it's actually how do you create a safe space and a brave space, right? What would we define as a brave space? I'm going to leave that to your imagination. It's something that we will dig a bit deeper. It's in the workshop, but it's really about when we start talking about our values, when we start bringing some of the real human side of us into it, and how we do it becomes a very, very critical aspect. So some questions and thoughts that we need to have when we're talking about creating connections. So one of the first questions I want to get you to think about is this one, is how intense and deep will the conversation need to be during your facilitation or during when a group comes together? I was in a workshop on Monday and Tuesday, which prevented me from joining day one and day two of the summit. But in that workshop, we had one group that was coming together to talk about which product are they going to discard. Now, a lot of the people in that meeting were working on that particular product. Their jobs are on the line. My telling them, okay, let's do a visual cue or let's do a rename yourself, probably wouldn't be enough to get them to talk and really go deep into that conversation. So one of the big things I had for me was, how do I create that brave space for them to be very open about it? Because I knew that conversation was going to be really intense and really deep. The second question I want to throw out to you is, how critical is it to create a safe and brave space to have meaningful and challenging conversations in order to achieve the outcome? If we need people to challenge each other, we need people to say, look, I don't agree with you. And this has significant life-changing impact for some of the participants showing up. It's a question for me that I often have. Do I need to create that brave space? Now, I want to be very clear. There are plenty of situations where we do not need to go that deep. In fact, you're probably not necessary. It's okay to just create a safe space, right? So how critical is it, for me to have that if I want to achieve the outcome? That's the second question to sort of think about. The third one is, how much value is derived in creating some time at the start of your working with the group? Now, we all have, I don't know what all of you do. When I design a 3-hour engagement with group, multiple people, we'll always have a 10, 15, or 20-minute check-in, some kind of an activity as soon as everybody comes on. Now, is that the time? Now, let's think about it. When we work with groups in a face-to-face environment, the simple truth is we know that meaningful conversations connections take time, and it happens with deep conversations. In fact, for those of you who ever run a meeting or facilitated a conversation of a group of people meeting together for the first time, it's not when they walk into that room that the connections are created. It's maybe the little coffee and donuts or the coffee and bagel they're having outside. Or today, when we started, we had those little breakout rooms where a few of us would go to and connect with each other. So we know those connections take time, whether it's in the virtual environment or whether it's in the face-to-face environment. It takes time when we break for lunch and we go and sit down and ask each other questions. So here's the simple truth for us, that we need to bring in the separate time and space for those connections to happen. It is so critical to be able to do that. So I'm going to invite you to put in chat How are you creating that space and time for connections to happen in virtual environments? It could be your team meeting when you're getting those 4 or 5 people in your team together. And the other truth is, if you're a facilitator and you're working with groups, we actually need to create that space in the virtual environment as well. I was so happy to see the breakout spaces, the networking spaces, all designed in a summit. It is so critical, and it's probably a lot of value that we're getting out of that. It is even that mural space that we are putting there. It's the Slack channel that Douglas talked about, where we're introducing ourselves. Now, this is an environment where many of us have come together to learn. Now, in the real world, when we are facilitating in our work context, we are bringing those groups together to achieve a particular outcome. Here it's learning. We can make it fun. There, that might be intense. It might lead to conflict. So what are some ideas? I'm going to share with you one best practice that I have seen and I've started to use in my work. Again, would love to hear from you. What are some of your ideas? Keep putting them in chat. Put them in Mural. We're going to generate a list of best practices and make it available for everybody. Now, I want to just share with you a very common assumption. The common assumption is that if you want to really create meaningful connections, you have to do it in a synchronous way. When we move into a virtual environment, do not underestimate the power of asynchronous connecting as well. We're doing that a little bit of introducing ourselves on Slack. About 12 years ago, I was a participant in a major workshop, and I saw a facilitator at that time send out a really interesting instruction to all of us. She said, there's a group of 15 people coming in. We're going to be working together virtually across 10 cultures, something like 9 time zones. Most of us did not know each other. We'd only exchanged emails. And she said, in order for us to dig deeper and go and really connect over the next few days of working together, I'd like us to introduce ourselves. And she sent out instructions for us to create a slide with whatever we would like to share. So she said, if you're going to add some pictures, put some professional stuff, etc. And this is the slide I created at that point in time. And I've sort of updated it as well. And it became my e-introductions. Right? Again, so if you want to get to know me a little bit, here it is. Right? And I had an amazing reaction because we had, 15 of us, or 12, I don't remember the right number now, but there were 12 or 13 of us, between 10 and 15. We had a slide deck with 15 or how many ever people there were. Everybody spent hours going through it. And on the first call that we got into, or even before we got into that first call, if you notice my 4th bullet point, I am a huge football fan, and it's soccer, the real football. I'm going to get in trouble with a lot of you. And my team is Manchester United. And there was a Liverpool fan. So if any of you know between the Liverpool-Man United rivalry, he was a Liverpool fan. And he reached out to me before saying, hey, I heard you're this. And it was hilarious. I said, I've got to rub some salt in his wound because we've just beaten him. So I showed up with my Man United jersey on, and he showed up with his last year's winning championship jersey on. And he said, well, you guys just won a game today. You won a battle. We won the war last year. Here's my jersey. And it was hilarious how we were connecting and everybody was jumping into that. So it was really asynchronous, but it came alive when we got in together to connect with each other. The other interesting thing is, if you look at my most interesting meeting was with the Dalai Lama. It created so much curiosity. People were asking me, what was it like spending time with them, etc. So do not underestimate the power of asynchronous connections as well. And this is really, really important. In the workshop that I'll have in a little while, we're going to get into a few synchronous connections. So here's some tips that I just wanted to share with you. One is create that time and space before. One of the best practices I want to leave with you is trying to create a quick connection for 15 minutes or 30 minutes in the start of a workshop. Yes, you'll get somewhere, but there might be an opportunity to have a separate space to do this. So again, in chat, just put some of your best practices. I just want to share with you a quick story. I've got a workshop coming up on Monday and Tuesday with a group where we've got a very significant outcome. My stakeholder has said that we need to put the elephant in the room. We've got to get some major issues out there. And I was sitting and designing it with my colleagues. And we've decided that if we really want these people to connect with each other and get to know each other, we need to do that beforehand. So I have a session tomorrow, Friday, in the evening from 7 to 9 p.m., where the group's going to come together for a pure networking, drinks, virtual connect session. And we've got an e-introduction. We're using a platform for people to wander around and network, etc. And a lot of people have already messaged me today saying they're really looking forward to that. They in fact, haven't even asked me about the agenda for Monday, but they're more curious about how do we connect with each other. So the business is going to be making some very, very significant decisions based on what that group comes up with. So creating a separate space, I'm not even going to do a check-in on Monday. I'm probably going to do what was the most fun thing you learned from Friday, and that's pretty much it. So with that, in the workshop, we're going to go a little bit deeper because of how do you bring value-based conversations into those connections and make it meaningful and brave as well. So I would encourage you to post your questions, share a best practice, put that up there. And I'd love to hear what your transportation vehicle metaphor is on Miro. Put it up there. And I hope to see many of you in that session. And I hope I've got you thinking about your next workshop as well. With that, thank you very much. Stay safe, and I hope to connect with all of you.